Boker Tov.
Boker Or.
Somebody got it from yesterday. When I say Boker Tov, you say
Boker Or.
Now we're doing Israel educational travel. Hi, everyone. Welcome in. I am Anna Langer, Vice President of North American Israel Strategy at Jewish Federations of North America. I see some of you at smaller tables off in corners, and I see some tables that are like halfway full. If you feel like coming together and being a part of an Israel educational travel community today, we'd love for you to come and sit at a table and have some friends. If you don't and you feel like everyone has cooties, then I get it. All right. It's my privilege here at Jewish Federations of North America to convene a group called the Israel Educational Travel Alliance. Now, the Israel Educational Travel Alliance is really a beautiful startup of a story that came from inside the field of Israel educational travel at a time of serious need. It was the early days of COVID. And as a reminder, like the kinds of things that we were doing in those early days of COVID were like wiping our mail with some sanitary wipes. Not sure at all whether or not we could spend time in person with each other ever. I was running in the middle of the street to get my morning jog in. And amidst this, the largest, most important intervention in producing connection to Jewish identity, Jewish community, and to Israel was all of a sudden thrown totally out of our potential grasp. Now, I don't know about you, but working in the Jewish professional community for as long as I have, I know that Israel educational travel is a gateway into Jewish life, both for participants and for professionals alike. You may have heard me say this yesterday, but I would not be standing here today if it weren't for a birthright trip that I went on 2 days after I graduated from college, followed up by a Masah trip, followed up by Aliyah, and followed up then from taking on work to invest in the future of Israel and American Jews together every day. This is our number one intervention and tool. And if the origins of the IETA tell you anything about the crazy state of this field over the past number of years, this has been a field that has needed to rapidly adjust. This year brought horror, terror, change and sorrow, I think, in ways that I don't really have language to describe, but I know that I've seen in the faces of people who are in this room, but more so saw when I went to Israel for the first time after October 7th. I needed to go for me, and I needed to go and be with the people who were there because they were changing. This whole work of Israel educational travel has now become not only our most core intervention in developing the very things that we as a community are so committed to: connection to Jewish identity, connection to Israel for Jews and non-Jews alike, but now it's also the way that we are brought together during our absolute worst time of crisis, a time when it feels like diaspora and Israel might be moving further apart, not from our best attempts to try to hold each other, but because the experiences that we are having in the world are so drastically different than each other. I am so privileged today to be joined by some incredible colleagues from the Israel Educational Travel Alliance. Now, in February of this last year, a group of IETA leaders came together really quickly to this hotel and had a beginning of a conversation about what Israel educational travel was in this new reality. What's bearing witness? What is spending time together? What does it mean to show up as a full young American Jew full of questions about anti-Semitism, identity, and so on, and then need to sit in conversation with somebody who has a family member who is held hostage, and to make space for both? In all of this, my friends, these people have done incredible work to help to build the field and make it agile so that it is relevant today. So just among the people who are represented right here, just right here on this panel, okay, I'm gonna introduce them for a minute. They took 31,500 participants to Israel. I'm sorry, I just need to pause for a minute. Did anyone here expect that people were taking travelers to Israel in those numbers? In our worst year, just this group of people alone have taken 31,500 participants to Israel. This is the strength and the resilience of the community who is stepping up to lead and figure out how we're going to do this right and together. Among them, they innovated totally new kinds of programs. You're going to hear from them in just a few minutes about what some of these kinds of programs are, but suffice it to say that this moment called for many different kinds of Israel interventions than we'd had in the past, and we're going to dig in from our session title more into the who, what, and how of Israel educational travel. But I want to note to you, everything changed. At one category, another, who we are taking is different, why they're coming is different, where we're going is different, how we think about doing it and the how for why people show up is different. This group is going to start to fill you in on the best practices that they know how to do individually, but also have shared among themselves as a group. This is part of a much longer ongoing conversation of the Israel Educational Travel Alliance. I'm going to invite you to do one thing very quickly before we jump in. The IETA does a few things. First, we do this. We do best practices, collection, dissemination, sharing, and conversation. The second is we do this. We do building communities of practice who are doing our work. But the third thing that we do is research to better understand and reflect what is happening in the field right now. In front of you on your tables, you have a QR code and the opportunity to win a Starbucks coffee. I am a Lemon Loaf fan. I don't know whatever you want, but there's $50 sitting on the table for you to fill out one question related to our IETA current survey about the field of Israel educational travel moving into 2025. We would love to serve you and represent you, so please complete that, and if you do, you will get information about our next thought leadership gathering in Israel in January of 2025 about the future of Israel educational travel built by you, for you, of you. I really look forward to meeting you there. Without further ado, it is my absolute privilege to introduce you to my colleagues on this panel. Oh, I'm on the right page. All right. Starting from over here, all of these individuals sit on the IETA steering committee. So first, I just have to thank them as my partners in the amazing work that they make possible. Directly to my right is Tova Katz from the 1-8 Foundation, an expert in all things Israel travel. Adina Friedman is CEO of Young Judea. Gil Galanos is CEO of iTrack. Shelley Kadar is...
Not a CEO.
What's that?
Is not a CEO.
Is not a CEO. Is not a CEO. I'm sorry. I think you deserve a CEO title if we just want to give it to you.
So much.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Shelley's my boss, so it's fine. She's everyone's boss. Shelley is Director of Connecting the Jewish People at the Jewish Agency for Israel. It sounds like a small job. And Liz Sokolsky is Vice President of North America at Birthright Israel. our panel.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks everyone who came today to this session. I think if you're in the room, you already recognize the importance of Israel travel and how critical it is, especially in this moment where it's difficult and where it requires constant adaptation. And our goal today is for the practitioners who are really leading the field and doing these trips at scale, even during this really difficult year, to share some of their learning, some of these adaptations, and perhaps most importantly, what they're taking forward with them into travel planning for 2025. So we think there will be something here for everyone. Everyone will have something to take away. And we really want to start by digging into the what, right? We know that trips look different now, right? Starting October 8th, they look different. So we want to dig into how they look different, what kind of adaptations have been made, and what the trip actually looks like. So we're going to start with Liz from Birthright.
I have a mic, so can I talk like this, or do I need a mic? Because I can do that.
You need a mic.
I need a
microphone recording.
Okay, I have a mic now. Is this okay? I'm going to multitask with my left and right hand.
So Liz, we have a good sense of what a Birthright trip looked like before October 7th, and what we'd love to hear is how it looks different now. What are some of the adaptations that you've made? Please share.
Okay, so just to clarify, but it doesn't have to be that close. Just to clarify, when I talk about Birthright Israel is now an enterprise and a multi-product organization. So we have what most of you know as the classic Birthright Israel 10-day trip, which is much of what you're asking me about. But I don't want to be remiss and not talk about, when we talk educationally, we're also including Onward, our volunteer programs, and Excel as part of the work that we do. So after October, we did what everybody did. We took a deep breath. And we said, how can we continue to bring young people to Israel? And the first thing that we did was we pivoted into bringing volunteers to Israel. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that now, but we brought, by the end of this year, it will be 8,000 volunteers to Israel, which started in November after October. And we started just by bringing them and then adding educational components even into the volunteer experience. And for those of you who were at the session yesterday about service in Israel, that could tell you a lot. We'll talk about that at another time. For the classic trip, there were a few questions that we asked ourselves and concerns that we had, right? Could we run a meaningful trip? And what does a meaningful trip mean right now? Could we make our participants, can we provide their safety and make them feel safe? We have Israelis on all of our programs. The Mifgash is an essential part of the program that we have. And could we still have that merger and understanding of each other during this very important time? And the anti-Semitism on campus and anti-Zionism on campus is already happening. And there were people both in Israel and in the United States feeling that they were on the front lines. And how does that come into the program? How are we going to address social diversity in Israel, which is an important part of the Birthright Israel trip? Were we going to be able to deal with our relationship with Arab Israelis, with other social diverse groups? Would just doing programs with Druze and Bedouins be enough and be authentic enough on our trips? Bearing witness. And what was that going to look like? Were we going to take people down south? Were we just going to, not just, but were we going to formalize having testimony from survivors of Nova who are their peers, from hostage families? How do we integrate that into the trip? Can we still have fun? Can we still make people fall in love with Israel? Can they still have those aha moments that aren't based on tragedy, but are based on joy and the amazement of being in Israel? What was the emotional flow of this program going to look like? And so we built those components into the trip. We built resilience into the trip, critical conversations, less is more. This isn't my colleague Zohar says, Birthright isn't a sightseeing trip, it's an insight-seeing experience, right? So how was that going to look on the trip? A volunteering component giving back. We learned from the Israelis so quickly how the Israeli civic society came and rose up. What does that mean? How can we show our participants what that means? Can we build in teaching resilience to North Americans or participants from all over the world and the Israelis? And again, the emotional flow of the trip, and not just the emotional flow, but what type of emotional first aid, basically, were we going to be able to provide our Israelis, and by the way, when I say Israeli participants, our madrichim, our tour educators, the bus driver, the medic, some who are going to be staffing trips and being on trips 2 days out of Gaza. So those were the components that we built in, and I'm doing that very structurally because I happen to know some of the questions that are coming up, so those will be addressed later.
That's right. Shelley, thank you, Liz. Shelley, can you tell us a little bit about what it's like for Israelis to be on this trip, how the adaptations have impacted staff training, and really the experience of Israelis as part of this experience as well?
So firstly, thank you, and thank you, Liz, for everything that Birthright's doing. It's amazing. I think the numbers that Anna has shared are just incredible. Full disclosure, I'm an Israeli, and I have participated on trips, but in a professional capacity, so not as a madricha or as a mifkash. So I want to speak, thank you for, from the perspective of the Israeli staff and also participants. There's a very famous phrase by Shai Agnon, who's a Nobel Prize winner, Zichrono Livracha, who said, when times change, actions change, and when actions change, words change. And I feel like it's so timely to use this now because times have changed and the things that we do have changed, but even more so the terminology and the experience of being an Israeli now, welcoming and participating in journeys of Jews who come from around the world to Israel. Just has different terminology. I would say that before October 7th, a lot of this was about, fun and adventure and showing them Israel and being the host. Whereas now there's an experience of needing to be hugged and needing to be seen and telling my story. And yeah, I get a lot of that from Liz, which is fantastic. I'm speaking personally, needing to be hugged, needing to be seen, but also, as an Israeli, needing to be hugged, needing to be seen, needing to tell my story, doing my job while actually also feeling that I'm representing something that is of a greater need. And it's confusing. It's very, very confusing because everything has become extremely personal and extremely volatile. I would say my friends here on the panel know something that I've lost. I've lost many things, unfortunately, on October 7th, but one of the things that I've lost is the barriers that I had of politeness and knowing how to, contain myself and my gingy in American company or other companies, and that sort of has fallen through as well. So there's a lot of things that just come out without, being filters, so very less filters. I also think it's really important to mention that there's the work element. The tour guide industry in Israel, the bus industry, the hosting industry, the touring industry has been hurt severely, just coming out of COVID and now, into this. Hotels that have become, places for evacuees still hold. I want to mention there's a lot of conversation about the South in this conference. I do want to mention we have a big war going on in the North, ongoing. Today is a difficult day. Yesterday was a very difficult day. Every day is a difficult day, unfortunately. And hotels are hosting evacuees, changes the energy. So the whole hospitality atmosphere is different. And bringing groups to Israel today for us, for Israelis, is not only, again, about being seen and being told, but also about parnasa, about work, about money, about being employed. We have a whole host of morei derech, of tour educators who are in and out of miluim, who find it very difficult to keep a job, who find it very difficult to concentrate when they come with a group and are now battling, to keep their profession because it's not just a profession, it's a vocation. So this was a very confusing answer to your question about the experience of Israelis, but these are very confusing times.
100%. So now I want to focus on a core component of trips, which are mifgashim, right? These cross-cultural encounters that enable participants to really authentically connect with their Israeli peers. So Adina, what I want to ask you is, how have mifgashim changed and been impacted since October 7th? And how does it impact how you train and prepare staff and participants for these encounters?
First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel and with this incredibly impressive group of people. And I want to thank JFNA for IETA, because the work that we do each and every day, and particularly in the last 2 years, is heart-wrenching and difficult work. Any of you who are involved in Israel travel know that we know it is of critical importance, even more so today than ever before, but incredibly difficult and so important to have this network of colleagues. So thank you. Young Judea has been running, as a Zionist youth movement, we have been running immersive Israel travel for over 70 years. It's really the bread and butter of how we do our work with teens, college students, young adults. And we are very proud of the fact that we have operated trips in peacetime, in wartime. It's very much essential. And mifgashim, encounters, are the heart of this experience. When we talk about mifgashim, or encounters with Israelis, it's not just, and not to belittle this, but it is more than, although there's still value in this, the one-day meetup with an Israeli, or the encounter with the bus driver, or the shomer, the guard. For us, encounters are embedded in every day of the program. Through a partnership we have with Sofim, we have Israelis that participate in our programs for every day of the program in Israel. And so we've actually learned a lot about these encounters. The nature of encounters has actually changed quite a bit, because while the ideal of encounters is a peer-to-peer, right, somewhat of an equal, the opportunity to really create a personal connection with somebody and see eye to eye. We try to connect teens with teens, college with college, young adult with young adult. There is a gap. There's a gap right now, particularly between North Americans and Israelis. And as much as we try to empathize, hug, hold, be there, the truth is that we are having very different experiences today. And so one of the, I think, greatest challenges and opportunities for us is to bridge that gap. If we are to have the most impactful experiences in these encounters, they need to be authentic, they need to be empathic, and they need to be bidirectional. And that, I think the bidirectionality is definitely a big shift for us. There's a lot to gain, but there's a lot more even to risk in these encounters not being positive at this time. We can leave a negative mark, and it has to do with the types of encounters that we have. As I mentioned, peer-to-peer is really the ideal, but there are different kinds of encounters or dynamics that play out. A few were mentioned before. Liz mentioned the role of witness and testifier, right? So Israelis are very much being put in a position now to share their story and and we are witnessing that, right? So how we hold those stories is really important. The role of comforter and bereaved, right? Shelley mentioned that. We are very much playing the role of comforter because Israelis are mourning the loss of their friends, their families, and they need to hear also the hope that we have for them. The role of prosecutor and defendant. This might be a little bit unusual, but in fact, given the audience that we're bringing in from North America, a lot of times Israelis are put on the stand, so to speak, right? They have to defend. Why is it? They almost have to represent the whole of Israel, their entire government, all the decisions that are made every day. And that can obviously be incredibly uncomfortable and unfair, right? No one Israeli represents all of Israel, or October 7th, right? I've heard more than one Israeli say, I am not October 7th. Funder and recipient. I think a number of the people here have been on missions, for sure, through Federation, right? That creates an unequal dynamic as well. There's a power dynamic there. And so we have to work extra hard to make those encounters feel authentic, right? So that there isn't sort of a show put on. And then maybe just to say as the last thing, that how we prepare for these encounters in order to make them successful is important. So the work we do and how we set it up, the actual setting and environment, and then of course the time for reflection and processing can all contribute to the impact and positivity of these encounters.
Thank you, Adina. So we dipped our toe a little bit into the what's changing. Before we go into the who, we want to do a quick lightning round, wake everyone up a little bit. So in rapid fire format, starting with our favorite victim, Gil Galanos, we are going to answer the question of what is the biggest challenge that your organization is facing post 10/7 as it relates to Israel travel?
Thank you, Tova. The biggest challenge is no doubt, I would say two challenges. One is flights and cost in general. Very hard to get people to Israel these days, and we need to be very, very creative and also double down on subsidies on whatever it takes, because our model is a little different than most of the other Israel Travel Alliance models. So we definitely need to be more minded to that. And the other thing is obviously a lot of our target audiences are graduate students, so campus these days is not an easy place. I just got a WhatsApp from one of our leaders about boycott the Israel Trek office hours. Come to talk to us if you were invited to join an Israel Trek. So definitely huge pushback on campus and how we deal with that with our partners.
Thank you. Adina.
So three big changes. One, impacts on our program, as was mentioned before, change to the content, addition of volunteering, where we can go, huge limitation. Every day we have to check, what the security clearances are and be nimble and be able to pivot and change, which presents huge challenges for the teams on the ground. You can't just set the itinerary and go. The second thing is to mental health. Both the mental health of the staff themselves. Our teams in Israel, not only are they facing their own losses, but many of them are serving in the reserve duty. So they're in and out. One day they go to the office and they lead a group of North Americans. The next day they're on the front lines. If you can just imagine that. And then, of course, for our participants themselves who are dealing with their anxiety and stress of being in North America. And last thing, and I can go into this more deeply another time, is about the profiles, who we're bringing to Israel. And that is very much changing.
Which we're going to get into.
Yep.
Shelley.
I would say that while this is, again, more than 400 days in October in Israel, outside of Israel, the war has pretty much, it's not in the same sense of urgency as it was. And for us, the biggest challenge is to understand, moving away from a sense of urgency and building from it a sense of agency. So people feel that coming to Israel is part of them, I shared with a colleague earlier on, as part of their 1968 moment. Because there's a 1967 moment here that we've seen, and thank you everybody in this room, for your support and for everything that you have done, driving you out of a sense of urgency that happened on October 7th. But that sense of urgency is declining, and I feel that as the Jewish Agency, we need to embrace that and understand that now we have to really, really utilize that to create a sense of agency so everybody feels they're a part of, I don't like the word rebuilding, but I will use it, rebuilding, restructuring, making Israel better again, containing the hope.
I think the challenge of what we always felt was so critical, which since in Birthright Israel, we're not a movement or affiliated with any organization, the tension between presenting balanced messaging, which was always so crucial to us, and being able to now articulate what is now somewhat of an agenda. And we always, and by the way, we always used to say Birthright has no agenda. Of course we have an agenda. Of course we do. It's not the type of agenda that we're accused of, but being able to use what was before the word no one wanted to use, which was Zionism, and now integrating that into the work that we're doing and the content that we deliver, and still presenting balanced messaging and allowing for voices and opinions versus, like there is, you said freedom of speech, but there's not freedom of making facts not facts, right? So what is the content? How do we present the balanced messaging and still yet stick to this agenda of we want them to fall in love with Israel. We want them to feel comfortable and confident and be able to somewhat articulate their experience when they come home.
Thank you. So now we're going to pivot a little bit and talk about the who. We know from the data, from qualitative reports, from trip providers, from actually seeing who gets on these planes, that the audience of Israel Trips is slightly different now, post 10/7, than it might have been before. It's a slightly different profile of participant who's willing to get on a plane during wartime and come to Israel. So we want to hear from each of you a little bit about that. And Gil, we're going to start with you. You know, iTrek is unique sitting on this panel in that you serve primarily non-Jewish leaders, non-Jewish graduate students and non-Jewish leaders. And we'd love to hear a little bit about who's been coming on iTrek trips this year. I mean, I think it's amazing that there are non-Jews getting on planes to go to Israel right now. And we'd love to hear a little bit more about those changes that you're seeing and who's getting on the plane.
Sure. So a bit of a background for those of you who are not very familiar. iTrek started almost 14 years ago with the idea of bringing influentials, mostly non-Jewish influentials, to Israel. We started with MBA students, expanded to law and policy with the help of 1-8 and many others. And that was the kind of the legacy program. That was the main of our work. We reached 25,000 participants in the past dozen years, and more than 90% non-Jewish. Most recently, 2 years ago, we started a new program called Launchpad to bring business leaders, elected officials, and different types of leadership groups. And very recently, we absorbed and started offering our third program by absorbing reality from Schusterman Family Philanthropy. So also, again, most of the participants are not Jewish, different mix, different types of people. So definitely it was very hard to bring our bread and butter, our legacy program, graduate students. We had 6 treks coming with about 150 participants, which is a fraction, a really small fraction of the number of people that we're bringing. The main reasons were safety and security in Israel, and obviously a huge pushback on campus and people that are willing to go. For Launchpad, we saw actually a different trend. Not that it was easy because of the safety and security of Israel, but still we saw a lot of interest for people to come. And specifically, we piloted 2 state legislative tracks from Arizona and Texas. And we were very surprised. We brought 2 bipartisan groups from Republicans and Democrats who were fascinated or very interested to come to Israel because politically for them and professionally for them, it was really interesting to come. And we brought most recently a U.S. Supreme Court clerkship to Israel. Again, I was very surprised. They came last September. Days before the Iranian attack, they knew that Iran is going to attack, and I spoke with the leader of the group a day before they were taking off. I was like, Gil, what do you think? I said, and our model is obviously that they make decision, we empower them to make that decision, and I said, really, it's your decision. If you ask me, I highly recommend that you come, and I wouldn't cancel it, and hopefully. It helped, and they did come. So 2 of them canceled, but we had a dozen clerks from U.S. Supreme Court, not Jewish, never been to Israel before, a couple of federal judges that came. So again, it shows us that we should never give up. We definitely want to go as broad as possible in terms of the people that we attract, and as long as, of course, they're leaders and influentials, we want to make sure that we cater to what they are interested in. But we did see people who are coming. And of course, we had some more alumni tracks that are more solidarity type. So our participants, Jews and non-Jews that came because they wanted to show solidarity. And last but not least, we did also support business leadership. And most of them, I would say, were Jewish. So that was a big change for us, and we decided to do that despite our focus on engaging those that are not affiliated. We felt that this is a year where we need to broaden a little bit more what we do, and overall we supported 21 tracks and 490 participants, which is, again, about 12% of what we were hoping to do last year, but given everything that was happening, we're pretty proud of that.
Yeah, and I think you're pointing out an interesting observation that I can just add from other trips that we know about as well, which is that, for some people, they see Israel in the news and they get scared and they don't want to get on a plane. Some people see Israel in the news every day, and based on their profession, right, elected officials, right, certain segments of leadership in the United States say, that's exactly where I want to be, because I want to have a firsthand experience there so that I can come back in a more informed way because it impacts my work in some way. So I think there's this inverse relationship. Some people during a time of crisis is actually increases their desire and willingness to want to go because it's in the news, it's current events, and that informs their work. We've seen that with trips for attorney generals. We've seen that with AIEF trips with elected officials. So I think you're pointing out to something there that's not necessarily intuitive, but we saw it play out this year in multiple contexts. It's really important, right? So not to assume, right, these people aren't going to get on during wartime.
100%.
Actually, some of them, DAFCA
100%.
specifically during wartime, it's more relevant.
Yeah, I'll just add that I think it's very natural that when crises happen, we're all like, we want to shrink ourselves and kind of put a helmet and vest. And I think the opposite is what we need to do. We need to lean in and we need to look for opportunities. So while business students who are mostly looking for fun and, for them, it's less attractive to come to Israel, MBA students, because they can go to China and Japan and do other things and they don't have to come to Israel in a year like that. For law and policy students, as you mentioned, it's actually more interesting to come these days. So we still need to figure out the financial cost, we still need to figure out some of the safety and security elements, but definitely there's even more interest these days, and we're working on getting as many people as possible that are interested in coming.
Liz, Birthright is perhaps the organization, it is the organization that has done trips since 10/7 at the largest scale. And I think even in your own data, you've seen the participant profile shift even since 10/7. So talk to us a little bit about who's coming on Birthright and Onward trips these days.
Okay, so, the assumption is, of course, and if you see it in the data and you just look at it clearly, the more connected are coming in higher percentages, but that doesn't mean that the most unaffiliated are also not coming. And as opposed to telling you that, X percentage higher of more connected versus casually religious versus those who just, associate with ancestry, which means I know I'm Jewish, but that's all I do. They still came. 14% of our participants were what we call ancestry, that had no Jewish connection other than knowing that they had some Jewish connection. What I would say is the most different of the profile of the participants is a level of curiosity. That before, for the most part, most of participants that come on a classic Birthright trip versus an Onward internship or a longer, more intense program were coming either to have fun or because their friends were coming. Now people are coming because they are curious. And I would say if that was one of the data points that we were measuring, that would be the biggest change in who we are bringing. People who never thought that, even the ones that were more connected, that going to Israel was necessarily an important part of their Jewish journey. Now, because of what they're facing back home on their campuses and in their communities, they want to understand. They want to understand what's all the fuss about, kind of thing. And with our volunteer program, I would say about 50% of the people who came on the volunteer program or more were alumni of Birthright Israel, of Onward, of Masa, people who have been coming to Israel over the years and wanted to come back. And we had people who this was their first time ever in Israel come and volunteer. So I think we've really seen the gamut.
And Adina, let's go to you for a minute because you serve teens. So very different demographic, different set of challenges. These are minors. They need their parents' permission to travel.
So do 26-year-olds.
And the 26-year-olds, right?
It's good that you said it. Yeah, they're minors.
But how has recruitment changed for teens, and how are you able to kind of deal with some of the safety concerns that you're probably getting from a whole bunch of Jewish parents?
So it's true. The biggest impact that we've seen is in our short-term teen travel programs. I would say despite the unbelievable investment that's been made in this sector, especially in the last 3 years through Route 1, where we all saw our numbers double, triple, this year our programs are down 50, 75%. And I would attribute that to a few things, especially because of the short-term nature. Many parents are in the boat of saying, I'm going to wait until things calm down, right? Like, why do I have to go now? Go next year, go the year after, I'm going to wait and see. The second thing is there's a social cost, particularly for teens. I'd say young adults also. They speak about this social cost of going to Israel. Remember that the programs we run, we are a pluralistic organization, so we really cross the gamut in terms of where people are coming from. So we do very much see that. And the third thing is the peer effect, which is the role, even more so now than ever before, the role of social connectors, especially within a teen group, of if one kid says or decides, or their parents, because parents play a huge role here, you're not going, then the entire peer group doesn't go. So the numbers actually drop there. It's not in the singles, it's in the, it's in the double digits in those groups. So how we address those shifts. This might seem sort of counterintuitive, but we have leaned into more transparency in our marketing, right? So although you might say, oh, we shouldn't show them what's happening, or we shouldn't necessarily talk about, what's happening in wartime, the truth is that if you're an Israeli who's living in Israel, in most places, especially where we take them, we're not taking them into a war zone or into the Gaza envelope or the borders. They are living quotidian life. So we are showing them, they're going to the beach and they're going, to the Tayelet, and they're doing all those things. And we also show them very clearly when they go to memorials, they go to Nova, and so all of that is through the marketing. Very important that we are transparent. The second thing is that we do put safety and security concerns front and center. So in almost all of our sessions now, and this has shifted because in the last year and a half, we used to say, let's not scare them, let's not traumatize them, don't put it up in front. And then we got accused of hiding information. Why aren't you telling us? This is this is the elephant in the room. And so we have in our presentations now, the first slide is, safety and security. Here's what you need to know. It does not hurt that in our experience, we have been running and operating trips for many, many years and done them in a safe way. And so the credibility factor is high, and we have to continue to remind them, why is it that you can trust us? We just ran a trip. While not offering false guarantees. None of us are in the business of ensuring or guaranteeing safety, and they have to take a leap of faith with us, as we do every day. And then I would say the last thing is, how do we show the value in coming to Israel now? Because we can talk all about the importance and the safety and security concerns, but we have to tell them why it's important now more than ever, to show up. And I would say that's really important, and for them to hear it not just from us as the organization, but to hear it from the participants themselves. We do a lot of first-person accounts, and the parents, so that it's, they actually are speaking in their own words, and I think that goes a long way, particularly with peers.
Thank you. So we want to shift now to the final section of our discussion, which is really kind of future focused, right? I think a lot of us were hoping, praying that these post 10/7 adaptations would be a short-term, temporary thing. And what we're finding now is, right, over a year on in, this is just the new normal. And we need to be thinking about, right, trips will never look the same as what they did before 10/7. And we need to be thinking about, as we now enter into year 2, post October 7th, with hostages still in captivity, with the war still going on, what lessons and learning are we taking from this year of experimentation and adaptation? What lessons are we taking forward, and how are we continuing to adapt trips as we are now kind of not in the immediate short term, but in a more medium term as we look forward? So Shelley, I want to start with you. There's a lot of questions right now around how you structure an itinerary. How do you make sure you're bearing witness, kind of engaging with the trauma, but also not having it dominate the narrative? And how do we balance all the different pieces of a trip that include bearing witness, but also having fun, the mifgash engagement, connecting to Israel in a positive, meaningful way? So talk to us a little bit about how you're thinking about that moving forward.
So it's a great question. I think that, at least from our perspective, when we're looking at everything that we've learned this year, is that we've learned that firstly, we have to build these trips as a long-term relationship. So the notion of trip, the word trip is, and I think Liz, you said it in one of our calls, it's a great word and it's a horrible word because it's it indicates something that is a moment in time. And I think for many, many years, this is not new to, post-October 7th. We know that these are journeys. We know that when you go on Birthright, or when you go on iTrack, or when you do all of these trips, it opens up a process, and it usually precedes by a process, and then has, all of us are making as best as we can with follow-up. So I think that's the most important realization that we have to embrace and articulate. I quoted Agnon, Davka, because the words needs to change about this. And we don't have to, choose now journey, whatever, but when we speak about trip, we have to look at it as something that is a process. And because it is a process, not everything has to happen in Israel. And the need to now, pack the itinerary with, now you bear the witness, now you go to this, now we cry, now we laugh. Now this was something that we felt specifically and particularly at the first 6 months, that we have to give everything. They have to do everything. They have to cry, and then they have to be happy, and then they have to have the good food, and then we have to show them that it's normal to walk around Tel Aviv, and then we have to and we pretty much exhausted our participants. Yeah, I see people are laughing. I apologize that you were on one of those trips, probably run by us. So I think to understand that this is a journey, and to sort of take a breather in a minute, which is not very Israeli to do, because we're like, machshav maher maher. And to also understand, as you said very correctly, that this is unfortunately, heartbreakingly, a normal. It's not the new normal even, it's a normal. And therefore, we have to be moving calmly through this process of Israel trips. Second, I would say, to do with this, of how to deal with this, is that we have to invest in the responsible adults. We have to invest in the responsible adults as part of this, whether it's parents, this generation of parents who are, I think, a little bit maybe younger than myself, because my kids are a little older than the kids who are going now. We have to invest in them, whether it's through their own trips, which we're not doing right now. I don't see a lot of parents' trips. We see some through Momentum, but we don't see a lot of parents' trips, and they're the ones who are needing to mediate this situation to the children, whether they are the educators, whether they are the informal educators, etc. That's another one that needs to happen, because that would help us balance off. And thirdly, I would say the process needs to be relationship-based. One of the most powerful things that happened for us, at least as a Jewish agency, and we're used to getting missions and solidarity missions from here and from there, partnerships, etc. We learned that if they're built on relationship, and it's not just about coming and, I don't know, there's like a hierarchy of it. The rich uncle from America is now coming to save Israel. We needed that, by the way, for a long time. I don't want to diss that in any ways. We need to build the trips based on relationships, and Israel and Israelis need also to understand why is it meaningful for Americans or North Americans to be in Israel in this moment, and create it in a way that's done. So it has to be mutual.
Thank you. And Adina, let's come back to you with teens, right? Because again, we're talking about children here. And how do you kind of think about designing an itinerary where you're exposing them to the tragedies of what happened without traumatizing them, and without having that be the central takeaway from the trip?
So I think this is why we call this Israel educational travel and not just Israel travel. We have to put our educator hats on and really think through designing an experience from the preparation that happens, the education that needs to happen, the exposure, and then the actual trip design, right? What is the program itself? Thinking through how we balance the experiences so that they are balancing, even though it's, again, a little bit antithetical, like how can you in a single day, go to Nova and then go to the beach? But for teens, they can actually pivot very, very easily. It's more us, the adults, I think, who have a hard time switching modes. And so having enough of a balance in the itinerary of these things is really important. And then, again, the debriefing and the reflection are critical, and every teen is going to have a different processing time, and some of them it will take them weeks and months, but we give them the tools, we give them the language, we give them the peer group, right? That is one of the main things they're building through these trips, is the peer group, in order to appropriately reflect and continue to process their experience, and with their parents. It's really important. I think it's important to say also that we shouldn't shy away from the trauma. You know, we talk about how we coddle our teens. It's true, especially American teens, and they can handle it. And with the right scaffolding, this is the educator part, and with the right support, and in some ways also preparing the parents for what they're going to come back with. I mean, I remember to this day when I went on the March of the Living in high school, and I remember when I came back, it was obviously a fantastic, life-changing experience. But when I came back, my parents said I didn't talk to them for 2 months. I just kind of went into this cocoon. And I think if they had more of the tools and resources to understand and how to help support me and bring me out in that moment, I think it would have given them also a lot of more comfort. So there's work to do with the teens and with the parents as well.
Thank you. So Gil, you guys have learned a bunch this year about taking non-Jews to Israel during this time. What of that learning are you guys taking forward, and how will that inform your trips and your thinking in 2025?
Sure. So first of all, I'll say before maybe touching about that, I want to say that, I mean, we're talking about the crisis, and we're talking about new normal, and we're talking about whether, it's like I want to get back to like COVID. We had very similar conversations. Like some of us were, looking at this and saying, oh my God, we're not gonna, things are gonna be dramatically different. It's changed forever, whether there's gonna be travel or not. And fast forward, there was not one point where it ended, but soon enough, like nobody wears a mask on flights anymore, and people are traveling and not considering that. And I do think, I'm very optimistic always, and I do think that that's going to be the case also with the Israel travel and educational travel. People will come. There's a lot of interest. Once they feel that it's a little safer, once we're creative about how to bring them to Israel, I do think it's going to bounce back like very, very fast. So again, I'm very, very bullish on that. In terms of the experience, again, there are no dramatic changes there. We go back to the core. The core of our tracks, we have very diverse group of audiences, but the core of the experience is education, fun, and culture. So of course, a little bit the mix of each of them and the nuance about each of them is changing. The education, yes, definitely part of the October 7 events, has to be part of that. But it's not where we lead our content with. We want to make sure that the Israel innovation and creativity and the fun in Israel is also taking place on the ground. So each group is very different, but overall the things are not that dramatic. I think what we needed to invest a lot is with our partners. So it starts with the tour operators. We work with Roots and Eshet for many, many years. They've been doing an amazing job. So working with them on setting expectations. The tour educators, we have the iTrek Academy, where we do a lot of work with our tour educators, the tour guides, and we really lean in on exposing them to all of the changes that are happening and how they tell the stories, how they lead, because they were traumatized also, and they are hurting as we spoke here, that they need work. So coming up with different activities for them to engage participants even before they come, or alumni, and help them also get funding, but also help with the experience. And lastly, the trip leaders, and I'm finishing, the trek leaders that we work with, obviously offering a lot more support to the trek leaders and how they can lead a little differently during a time like that.
Thank you. And Gil has outed his role on this panel, which is to be the eternal optimist. He really did say during COVID, like, it's fine, it's all going to be good. Liz, round us out here. So you spoke earlier about some of the modifications around resilience, volunteering. What of that do you expect to stick around in these birthright trips moving forward?
Definitely the volunteering component and how we integrate the volunteering component and service into all of the different types of trips that we have. And this is not, Rahmanut. Israel needs us to come and volunteer, although Israel does need it, but it's also healthy and good and feels good. It's the giver feels sometimes even better than the person who is receiving. And the post-COVID generation that we're dealing with, this has been resilience building for them and meaning for them. So definitely the volunteer component. The resilience component, but again, Tova, even the word itinerary bothers me. I'm bothered by words also, because it's not like some people say, can I see a birthright itinerary? And I go, yes, it's a book that's this thick that talks about narratives and themes and concepts. Okay, it doesn't matter where you're going from place to place. I think it's more than it's a component and what's happening, it's a frame of mind. That is a new way of looking at what we are doing. Look, I'm a firm believer. I was a formal Jewish educator, teacher, and then I was an experiential Jewish educator because I found that literacy is very important, right? The content is important. But identity comes from here. And it's experiential education that gives you the feeling and the identity. So I think the context of when we are building our programs, looking at what do we want the participants to know? What are we teaching them? What do we want them to feel? And how do we give them experiences that speak to their heart? And then there's the third thing, what do we want them to do? Right? So it's like from here to here to here. And when I say do, that's the parts that is the most challenging, right? We are not a Kiruv organization. And I'm not criticizing anything. We don't have that agenda that we want them to walk out like this. But what we want them to do is to be able to articulate what they are feeling and thinking and knowing. We want them to feel confident. We want them to feel connected to the land and the people of Israel. I don't believe that there's a separation between Jewish education and Israel education. I think it's one of the errors that we have made over the last decades of saying we teach Jewish education and then there's like an Israel component and maybe there's Israel education. It is intertwined. It's our heritage. It's our roots. It's where we come from. You can't, I don't believe, and maybe it's the strong Zionist in me, that we can do one without the other. There is a reason we are not taking trips to Bermuda or Spain doing Jewish education. We want to do it in Israel because that's the laboratory. That's what we need to feel and learn. So I really think that the components will evolve and change, and some will be sticky on some types of programs and some will be less sticky. It's more of a vision of what does Israel education in Israel mean.
Thank you, Liz. So, I think just from this brief panel today, we can see just how much learning is in the room. And I do just want everyone to give a round of applause, not just for our panelists, but everyone in this room who has engaged in Israel travel this year. Between COVID and October 7th, this field has had to just undergo such rapid transformation, and that requires being open-minded, being creative, being patient, being innovative. And so just on behalf of one of the funders of this space, just a huge, huge credit and kudos goes out to the field, to the IETA, who is doing their very best to try to capture and share and aggregate all of this learning so it can continue to go out and inform the field. So just really an incredible effort, and everyone in this room who's engaged in this work should feel so proud of themselves and the impact that they've been having during this tremendously difficult time. I think for all of us, reading about any type of Israel trip that happened this year warmed our hearts in a year where we really needed that. So it's really a tremendous credit. I think we're now going to have a facilitated Q&A, so I'm going to turn it over to Anna.
Hi, everyone. It's great to see you again. This is the cool thing about technology. I already have some questions that came from folks in this room that I have selected from in order for our panelists to respond to. And I'm gonna I'm going to try to clump them together into themes. So please note, if you're missing a theme at some point, these are my peers and my colleagues, and I encourage you to go over and speak with them about some other themes that are on your minds following. But I'm going to start with one that I think we touched on some of the specific symptoms of the challenge, but not particularly the way that the challenge itself is changing Israel trips, and that is logistics. That's the fact that getting to Israel right now is incredibly hard to do. I don't know about you, but I think like El Al is maybe booked from, I don't know, the next time I'll be able to go to Israel, because El Al is going to decide when they next have a ticket available for me to do so. And some of the other logistical questions that came up in questions were simple things about how long, like when do you actually tell participants if something is a go or a no-go, right? How are you thinking about the decision-making matrix of the logistical questions that you need to make, and how that determines how you engage with the core audiences that you are taking on your trip. So I know that that's a world of questions, but what I'm going to ask our panelists to do here is I'm going to ask you to jump in and share the things that on your list are like, this is the must do, and also if this is not available to me, I will not do. This is my no-go line, right? What is your in, what is your out, any feedback that you have about what's making that help you make decisions. Gil, I see you.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. So there are three things that are important. We just, and Lenora was with me, we just had a weekend with 200 iTrek leaders, alumni, board members, reality folks, and kind of listening to what really is important for them. There are three things that are really, really crucial. One is the flights. Two is cancellation fees. Again, our model might be a little different than yours. And three is insurance. And all of them are really, really, we're struggling with this. So with flights, coming up with really creative solutions like, come to Greece, we'll meet in Athens, and then we're either gonna shuttle you on a charter flight to Israel on our dime, or we're going to get you on a boat. This is my most recent idea. We're going to get you on a boat, and just like the Mapilim.
It's been done before.
Yeah. We're gonna have them jump from the boat, swim to the shore, and we're gonna shoot them while they do that, so they can really get the full experience of
Immersive Israel travel.
Experience. Exactly. You spoke about that.
And they get a towel and Akko.
So that's about the flights.
Then you should be taking them to Cyprus and not to Greece. But
Cyprus is problematic because you don't have as many direct flights to Cyprus.
Yeah.
You have direct boats, though.
But we're thinking about that as well. The second thing is cancellation fees. No cancellation fees. We need to make it so easy for people to say yes in a time like that. So 0 cancellation fees, cancel whenever you want, just say yes, and we're gonna take care of everything. Of course, there will be some asterisks, like if you cancel, if it's safe or whatever, we're gonna charge you. But the third thing.
But 0 cancellation.
But 0 cancellation fees. The third thing is insurance. We need to take care of that. There is a big problem with insurance. We kind of figure out good part of that, but we're definitely, we need to do more because these guys are coming and they want to make sure that they are insured while they're in Israel.
And just to add one thing to that, I just heard from a trip provider that their insurance cost went up from about $20 before the war to $400 a person. Right, so there's a cost implication too.
Yeah.
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 I have a question about it. When you say we figured it out about the insurance,
louder a little bit.
when you say we figured it out about the insurance, what do you mean by that?
That you'll need to speak with my COO.
Yeah.
So
Like, let's follow up.
It's a contract.
And there's all different types of insurance.
Does anyone else want to jump in? I'm going to note that one of our most attended sessions for IETA this year was about go, no-go decisions. So I'd actually love to turn your logistical question into, I think, like the logistical plus the participant question, which is what things do you need to know are possible on the ground in order to make the decision of the go, not go for the participants? Or I'm making an assumption there. I'm assuming that you need to have things true on the ground for that to be true, but maybe it's actually that confidence is not high enough, and therefore what you have on the ground doesn't matter. So help us with that, please.
So I want to say about,
Yeah.
sorry.
Adina first, if
Adina
you don't
first,
mind.
So we have basically two thresholds for both go, no go and or cancel, not cancel, right? You might be en route and you have to turn them around. So one is safety and security, which is an absolute. And the second is, can they have a meaningful experience? Right, so with all of the acrobatics around changing the itinerary around and the locations and all that, like you said, we're going to hit the themes and the educational goals regardless of where we are, but we need to make sure that we hit those themes, right? So it's less about the locations. So those are two thresholds for us.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to reiterate the exact two about the meaningfulness and obviously safety and security, and also about setting, the minimum participation ratio.
Yes.
We saw that groups are smaller, right, from what we know, and that's a huge financial burden because the bus doesn't get smaller with the group. I don't know if you've noticed that. The bus stays the same size. So I think something to also be thinking about is what is the threshold of participation, and we've noticed that we actually are able to adapt to smaller and smaller groups if we actually think from the beginning that our threshold is smaller to begin with.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just say that we work with adults and not young. So I moved to Israel a couple of years ago, and I have 3 girls, and it's safe enough for me to live there, and they love it in Israel. So for me, really the threshold of safety and security is like, come to Israel. It's going to be fine. We're gonna for us, it doesn't, like any if they feel comfortable coming and they know what the situation is. And yes, with the last group that we had, the siren went off and they all went to the sheltered room. And believe it or not, in a closing session, it was one of the highlights that I had to tell them that it was actually built in the itinerary, that they'll have the siren. So it was, I don't remember.
Maybe Iran.
He's the education director of Hezbollah.
I think also that as organizations that do this, we have to be prepared in Israel. So having a evacuation plan in place, knowing if you need to relocate your participants for any extended period of time, where that is going to be. Is there going to be food and water there? We ended up purchasing satellite phones for our tour educators and our staff because we were concerned about the communication system in Israel going down. So also just by yourself having the confidence that in any situation you are prepared for what may unfortunately occur, and making sure that's in place. It's not something that like maybe one day, because 25 years ago we said at Birthright Israel, like right after Birthright Israel, we started in 1999, and then the next year was the Intifada, right? So we've had that in place for a very, very long time. It's an important component too, just internally, logistically.
All right, so I have another sort of set of questions from the field, so thank you for contributing. The questions that I have are actually more about the content, the educational differentiations that you are making this year. Now, I think we heard a lot about new sort of areas of content that are addressed on trips today. Trauma, right? Anti-Semitism, the experience of being together with people who are going through mental health challenges, right? But the questions that I got were actually in a different positioning. They are from the educator's perspective. They are from the perspective of saying, okay, these younger people who are coming on trips are much more connected into Israel. They are full of a lot of questions, pre-existing ideas from social media, a lot of conversations that they've been waiting to have. They don't really know what the safe spaces are to have them. And we have much older individuals coming on trips. This IETA's last round of data showed us that trips are typically half the length of what they used to be, and the audiences are at times double the age. We now, through JFNA, have trips going of up to 75-year-olds, right? That is a very new audience for Israel educational travel. So the question from the field is, what are the educational approaches that you have needed to adapt differently in order to take in a new kind of participant who's looking for a new kind of Israel experience? Don't all jump in at once.
I can say about the new and about adults. Firstly, I want to really echo what Gil said about we are pretty much doing the same thing, adapting here, adapting there, but it is still the same Israel. And I think the takeaway from your shelter story is that there are shelters everywhere, and some of them are pretty funky, and they do keep us safe, and we do have Israeli technology also keeping us safe, thank God. But I think in terms of the educational adaptations, if I speak to the issue of trauma, I think a lot of people come to Israel expecting a traumatized nation, expecting teens to be walking around, with dazed eyes, and very, very concerned about our mental health state. And I want to really proudly share, at least from our experience at the Jewish Museum, we work with all walks of life, with all ages and everything. We're very resilient. I think you saw Irene yesterday, those of you who were at the plenary, you saw Irene from Kfar Aza, who told her story. We went out for drinks afterwards. There's not to undermine or diminish the tragedy in any way, but we are resilient people. And I think there's a lot of powerfulness in that, in people coming in expecting the trauma and then seeing resilience and then saying, oh, one of the major things that we can do for people in Israel, in Resilience Center, is create 5 friends that they can turn to in time of need. It's called My 5. It's an actual approach in resilience building, right? Chosen centers create My 5. This is what Israel trips do, right? They create your 5 people that you've experienced setting in a shelter with, and it was actually a funky experience that we're going to go back and say that we went through. So I think in terms of content, we need to verbalize it, we need to articulate it. I'm not sure that we're doing something that is dramatically different. We do miss going in the rivers in the north. We do miss, hiking in certain places, but we will be back. I reaffirm Gil's.
I think one of the things that have to be built into every single one of these experiences, and multiple times during the experience, is facilitated conversations.
Reflection. Mm-hmm.
And reflection time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's critical. It doesn't happen by itself. First, you have to train the staff to be those facilitators of these conversations, and you have to build the time into it, the formal time that is part of an itinerary, right? Less sites and more insights. Again, time for facilitated conversations, critical conversations, process, and 2 different kinds, right? Processing what you've just done. If it's a certain experience that you want to talk just about that experience, so that's a processing session, and then a more overall, right? The last 3 days, the last few days, what have we experienced? What have we learned? How are we feeling? What about this? So building those in, no matter what the age of the participants that are coming, is so crucial.
I want to just give one very practical programmatic idea that we have used over and over again now in our programs, and it's in our closing session. We do a facilitated round where we sit one-on-one and we ask each other the question, so how was it? To prepare them for when they come back and they have to answer the question, how was the trip? What did you experience? What was it like for you? For their parents, for their peers, for their teachers, right, depending on who they're seeing. And that modeling and actually doing that has been, we've heard, has been very valuable.
So we're at time. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, JFNA. Thank you to our panelists.
Thank you, Tova.
Thank you, Tova.